Welcome to the HP30 show on the Hockey Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Halliwell, joined today by our scouts, Mark Edwards, Jérôme Bérubé, and Brad Allen. This is the first of several podcasts we're going to be doing over the course of the summer as we lead up to the draft later this year. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a few players and answering some of the questions that we've received after the release of our 2020 NHL Draft Black Book, which is available now. Some of the biggest feedback of our rankings when they came out was the ranking of Tristan Robbins at 13 overall. Mark, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about Robbins and what went into his ranking?
So Robbins is an interesting player. So when we released our rankings back on January 16th, our WHL guys actually had him as a C-rated prospect. So that pretty much meant that he was not on our January top 50. And that's obviously changed on this final list here. One thing that explains that a little bit is just that Robbins got hot in the second half. So he had 33 goals, 73 points, and 54 of those points were actually in his final 33 games. So we do our rating scale, that 3 to 9 scale that we've talked about in the past. He was 7 hockey sense, 8 compete, 7 skill, 7 skating. So I think probably what I'll do is I'll just talk a little bit about those 4 categories, and I'll give a little bit better idea of, about this player. So hockey sense wise, great ability to anticipate the play, also process what's going on around him very quickly. He's deceptive. He's very creative. He'll mix up passing versus shooting, and he has the skill to pull off the things that he wants to do as well. Compete-wise, it doesn't take more than a few shifts to figure out that Tristan's compete is on display and see what he brings in that area of his game. He's more than willing to take a hit to make a play. He'll do everything he can to be first on pucks. He plays much bigger than his listed height and his weight. He's 5'10", about $175. We've seen him be the player left standing when he's matched up against bigger players. He's just not a player who plays on the perimeter. In the past, I've seen players like an Eric Cornell in Peterborough, a Perlini back in his draft year. They played on the perimeter. I'll throw in a guy like Chromiak in Kingston this year. He's another guy who plays a little bit too much on the perimeter for our liking. But Robbins, it's not like that a lot. He plays on the inside, very determined. He has that skill to boot. So the determination and just that want to that's in his game, playing against bigger and more physically mature players, you really notice it. Very driven player. And he'll score from in tight because he's willing to get in there and take the abuse. Skill-wise, scenario where the more we watched him, the more we just got sold on him. It's why he's continued to move up our rankings. Very good shot with a good release, an accurate shot. And his shot he was both good on the move and while stationary. It also, it flashed, his one-timers. And he was willing to shoot. So he showed the ability to score goals that we think will translate to the NHL. And he showed the ability to beat players one-on-one, showing off some pretty slick hands. Skating-wise, when I first saw him, my first few shifts, I thought maybe his skating might be the weakness. But the more I watched and we all watched, the more we realized that his skating was actually very good. There's a lot of agility, even some explosiveness. He's good on his edges, good balance, and good extension too. So a little bit of a summary of him there. When it came to his ranking, it was interesting because we just kind of kept asking, why can't he be a little bit higher? Why are we kind of limiting where he can be on this list? And I think one of the keys for me personally was when I kind of thought about him versus Mercer and being behind Mercer. And I really, really like Mercer. But I started to match them up versus each other. I just kind of found it more difficult to keep Robbins behind Mercer. I've described Mercer as a player that kind of has to compete, that dog on a bone compete. And Robbins has that, but where he comes out ahead is he's got the better shot and kind of better translatable scoring ability for the NHL. And I think that's one of the things that came up in the conversation when we're talking about him, and actually got him into the conversation to put him up with the big boys on the list. And then, when you get up in that area of the list, I think he went past Perot because of some risk that comes along with Perot, and kind of the same for Gunler. And then it got with Ridley, Gregg, and Reichel, and it was really tight amongst that little group there. And ultimately, Tristan just ended up on the top of those two. One thing that factored was the fact that I actually interviewed Robbins, and I didn't interview Gregg. So when it gets really tight, that can play a little bit of a factor as well.
Yeah, well, we both actually had a chance to speak to him just a couple, like maybe a month ago or so, earlier in the spring. And before we talked to him, I had a feeling of the kind of guy he was going to be. And I remember telling you that I thought he was going to be like, kind of like the fun guy in the locker room who's like joking around, but like all serious when it comes to, his work on the ice. And that's exactly how he was. But what was something that you maybe took away from the interview? He was an impressive interview.
Yeah, you did. I think you did nail that. That came through, especially when it moved on to your interview with him after I was done talking to him. So one important question for me is when I kind of just ask them to talk about their own game, and when a player kind of answers and it doesn't match up with how I view him, that scares me a little bit. Well, that wasn't the case with Tristan. He really knows his own game. And then another factor that I wanted to talk to him a lot about, another area I wanted to talk to him a lot about, was just his physical game and his training and that sort of thing. Since he's not, this kid isn't 6'3" and 220. So I just wanted to talk to him about his plans for the summer and training and all that sort of stuff. And I was really satisfied with what we talked about. He's building in Winnipeg so he can do his summer training there. And just the details he got into about his training, it kind of alleviated if I had any concerns on his commitment level in that area, because he's going to have to be as strong as he can be within that frame. And for what it's worth, he actually told me that he's 5'11" and 183 pounds now.
Yeah, he's very self-aware.
Yeah, I just think that sometimes players know who they are, and other times they don't. He gave Gallagher as one of his comparables. And I think he gave you another comparable too. So just overall an impressive player, both on and off the ice. And the more we watched, he just kept rising up the list, and obviously, I guess, surprised a few people, more than a few people, when he sits 13th overall on our list.
Yeah, definitely a player that you grow to like the more and more you watch him. And then when you talk to him, you just like him even that much more. But we'll just switch over to the Q now, and a prospect that's, been on everyone's radar for quite some time now. Projected number one pick and number one in our rankings is Alexis Lafreniere. Jérôme, you're kind of, you live in Quebec, you're the Q guy. Was he always supposed to be this high end of a prospect all along, or is this more of a recent thing?
The short answer is no. So the long answer is, so when he was in first year in Bantam, he was just like a decent player, but nothing about him screamed like he was going to be an elite prospect. So to give you a quick example, in his first year of Bantam, there's like the Canada games. There's also like a Quebec version of the Quebec games. So it's more like a regional tournament. So his region was there, but he actually didn't make the team. So he was cut from that team. And what happens is that 72 hours before the tournament started, one of the players on the team got hurt, and then they called him back. And the funniest thing is he didn't want to go because he was still kind of mad that he was cut. But he eventually went there and had a good tournament. He actually had a good end of the season. So that was in February of 2015. So we fast forward to the summer, July 2015, Hockey Quebec has their camp. So U15 camp, U14 camp. So Lafreniere is there, but he's not really talked about as a high-end prospect at that time. So at the time, guys like Xavier Parent, Samuel Poulin, Jacob Pelletier, Xavier Simon, or mainly viewed as like the top player from that age class. And what happened is that we had like a scout that I hired back then, the Marchambault, so that was like his homework. That was like his first homework for us. So he went there, and so he came back to me and he's like, Parent, Poulin, Simolo, Peltier, all good, but that Lafreniere kid is really good. And he might not be as good as them right now, but upside wise, he could be NHL upside wise. He's, he could be way ahead of those guys in 2-3 years. So I thought that was interesting, but I kind of want to judge it with my own eyes. So September 2015, there's a tournament like 5 minutes from my house. So that's like his Lafreniere second year bantam, and took 3 shifts, and I was like, okay, this guy is the real deal. So right after that tournament, he was, the best bantam player in Quebec. And so it took like, a 5 to 7 month period where everything changed for him. He went from like just a decent player in his first year of bantam to the best player in Quebec in his second year of bantam. So that was, there's like obviously he did like, he was a bit on the small side in his first year bantam, and then he really grew, and then obviously his skill level was always there, but everything catch up, and then skies were the limit for him after that. So that's kind of like the biggest like improvement for him was from his first year of bantam to second year. And he was the best player in bantam, and then the year after that in midget, he was number 1 guy from the start of the year to the Q draft when he went number 1.
Yeah, well, once it clicks, right? And then they just take off after that. Not everybody can, be Connor McDavid and be the superstar kid from the age that they were 5, right? Sometimes it takes a little while.
Yeah.
But just as you just explained, you've seen him play since he was in bantam. What are some parts of his games that you've seen kind of progress and evolve over the years for Lafreniere?
Yeah, the skill level was always there with him. I mean, you just look at his first year in the Q, scored 40+ goal. So the skill level was always there, but watching him in the last 3 years in junior with Rimouski was mostly like he started as a late birthday. Like he started his junior career, he was still 15 years old. It's mostly like seeing like progress physically. He went from being a teenager, and this year like he was like a man amongst boys. So physically was the biggest thing I've seen progress for him. His first year, like, yes, he scored like 40+ goal, but when he was like challenged physically, it was a bit tougher for him. And then like this year, I mean, it was pretty hard for anyone to take the puck away from him, and like down low, he was pretty strong on the puck, and so like physically, like he just every year he got stronger physically, and then that's why like he's definitely NHL ready right now. And also the skating was probably always the I don't want to say the weakest link of his skill set, but everything else is pretty much close to elite or elite. Skating was always average to me, and then I feel like this year it's where I saw the biggest improvement as far as like his speed, and now I have no worry at all with his skating.
Yeah, and they always improve a lot too when they have a late birthday coming back for another year before their draft year. There's always generally a pretty big improvement, especially in a guy like him, right? Another year does you good for development.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we actually, this year in the draft is a pretty big year for German hockey. Obviously, Tim Stützle is one of the most highly touted prospects out there, but there's also John Jason Peterka and Lucas Reichel, who are also both from Germany. It's kind of been a battle of the Germans, at least in our rankings, at least, and I'm sure across the board for many. Back in January, we had Peterka ahead of Reichel in our rankings, and then in our final rankings, Reichel surpassed Peterka on our final list. Can you guys just explain a little bit about what led to that change?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly start here. So JJ Peterka was an interesting one for us because Brad actually found him last year while watching Stützle, and JJ was tearing apart, a pretty average league. We almost put him in our early top 31 last June in last year's Black Book, but I actually chickened out on that a little bit because I thought he was just a bit too raw. Bad decision by me looking back now. But JJ flashed more skill in our earlier viewings. And then he displayed some of that skill and scoring ability during the World Juniors this year. As we moved closer to the spring and we started to watch more of Reichel, we saw a much more developed game from Reichel, and realized that he had more skill than we probably gave him credit for as well. So in the end, it turned out that not only did Reichel pass Peterka on our rankings, but it didn't even end up being all that close. And, we say that, and we really like Peterka. But I'm going to let Brad talk more on this, because he's actually watched more of the Germans than any of us, because they've actually been very good samples for our Scouts training course, which many people out there know we've been working on. So, Brad, why don't you just give a few more thoughts on these two guys and some of the differences?
Yeah, it's really interesting getting an opportunity to scout 3 German players that we all have as A-rated now, which is I wonder when the next time we'll say that is. It's been very interesting seeing the development in German hockey and just how much better the DEL has been the last couple of seasons. And that brings me to my first point, which is I really didn't expect John Jason Peterka or Lukas Reichel to be as effective as they were against men in the DEL. That said, John Jason Peterka didn't get as many opportunities as Reichel. He played less minutes, and so it was more of a limited sample for us, which is why we really wanted to see him play at the World Junior level and watch him perform there. And that's where he really shined. He showed his ability to get into soft ice and be the sniper for Stützle, and really showcase just his skill set and how he can be effective down low around the net area, and how he can use his explosive skating to apply pressure on the forecheck. That kind of characterizes John Jason Peterka as the fast twitch element of him. Everything he does is with purpose and is explosive. And with Lukas Reichel, you're looking at more of an efficient player, more of a cerebral player that thinks the game at a bit of a higher rate. And that's really the flip for us. If there was one way to summarize why we had Peterka higher and then the flip and have Reichel now ahead of him, it's because Reichel thinks the game slightly quicker, he processes information slightly faster, and he understands how to slow down the game at the right times to find his teammates in transition. Okay, Peterka has one of the best motors in the entire draft, but it's a double-edged sword at times. He sometimes overplays the puck or tries to force plays where Reichel doesn't. And so that's not to suggest we don't love both, though. We really do like both players. It's just hockey sense is the most important attribute to us, and Reichel has that at a little higher rate. And that's really the main difference. The other factor I would say is that Peterka is a bit more one-dimensional. He's a bit more of a shooter than he is a primary playmaker. And with Lukas Reichel, he has the ability to attack off the rush. He can work well off the cycle. He can work well off give and go sequences. He can play in transition. We use the word Swiss Army knife in the book, but we don't want to use that word to suggest somebody like a John Gabriel Pajot type of Swiss Army knife player where he'll use his physicality and his skill. We're talking more just the Swiss Army knife factor with the skill of Reichel itself within his game. So if you really look at it, they're just very different players, but both are extremely effective, and that's why they ended up A-rated prospects.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. We also in our book describe Reichel as kind of like a dual threat, which I guess makes a lot of sense when you're comparing the two. And the other thing too that you're kind of explaining to Peterka, just to kind of compare to somebody else in the draft class, is I've noticed that one thing about Cole Perfetti is he does that thing where, he'll slow the game down when he needs to, and it opens up lanes and everything like that. And you're kind of saying that Peterka doesn't really do that consistently, right?
That's right. We use the term tempo control. We were trying to, we've discussed it over the year to try to figure out a term that can emphasize that point, because to us, it's a very important way of determining an aspect of hockey sense. And perfect example, as you just gave, Cole Perfetti is the best in this class at that. He is the best in the entire class at slowing the play down. And that's where Peterka lags behind some of these other guys. And that's why he's ranked where he is on our list.
Right. But definitely has the potential to kind of develop into that kind of thing, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. He does flash it. It's all about development now with him. It's all about if he can develop correctly and learn when to slow down the play so that he can use his skating more effectively and more efficiently than he currently does, and use his teammates more effectively and efficiently than he currently does at times.
Right. Well, I mean, only time will tell, right, with a player like that. But we'll move on to a player that I actually enjoyed watching during testing at the Top Prospects game, which was just in Hamilton this year. I was actually very impressed with Jacob Perreault, both his skill and his speed. In the book, we talk a lot about his skill. So, Mark, if you want to just tell our listeners a little bit about Jacob and what we like about him.
Yeah, it was an interesting season for Jacob Perreault. When you think back so he was 18th overall on our early 2020 list that we released over a year ago now with our later release this year of this year's book. But yeah, 18th overall in last year's Black Book. And then we'll just fast forward to August of last August. And it was a little bit of a poor start for him, just going back to the Holinka camp where he failed to make the team. He had some poor outings in my first few viewings this season once we got into the OHL action. It was really poor effort level, and he actually fell out of our top 31 in the fall. To be honest, they were such poor viewings that I didn't even watch them again for probably 2 months. But I'll just fast forward all the way to the end of our live viewings in March before we got shut down. I wanted to see him because Sarnia was obviously going to miss the playoffs. So 2 of my last 3 games for the shutdown were of Sarnia, and it was just to watch Perreault. He was just okay in one game, but in the other game versus Guelph, he was excellent. He was competing. He flashed his skill. It was just the polar opposite of those early season viewings. So with this high skill level, we kind of had to put him back high on our radar, excuse me, and back up with the big guns in this draft. So now we're in the shutdown, and we just kind of dug into him. Excuse me, losing my voice. We dug into him, and the main thing was to watch a lot more games just to get more sample size of that compete level and the consistency within that compete level, because the skill is just so ridiculous.
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say is, as you've seen and actually used it too, Rachel, with Instat we can break down just about everything. And we watched all his goals and points and all that other good stuff. And one night I actually just watched all his shots from the season. It took about 40 minutes, and it was just fun to watch. We think he has the best shot in the draft, and that's really saying something because this draft is loaded with some really great shooters. He scored 39 goals, scored in many different ways, in tight, from outside, on the backhand, from bad angles. The kid can just flat out score. But I think one thing that we really like and maybe is a little underrated is his playmaking ability. He really is a dual threat. Incredible vision, creativity. Some of the plays he made to get assists were just fantastic. So when you can shoot like him, and then you got great vision and creativity, you become a really dangerous weapon. So Jacob just has this very high ceiling because of his high-end skill, but a bit of a lower floor because of that inconsistency in that compete department. And I should mention, actually, that it's mostly work ethic within that compete grade. So for us, we have the compete grade, and work ethic is just one of the aspects of that grade. So in other words, this is not a player who was afraid or he wouldn't play inside or willing to be first on pucks or be afraid to take a hit. He took hits to make plays. He played inside. All that stuff we want to see. He was not a perimeter player. If he was, he would have been much, much further down our list. For Jacob, it was just the fact that sometimes he liked to do things like coast, and glide back into his own zone. The weird thing is that in another game or even another shift, he would bust his tail to hustle back. So we know he has it in him because we've seen it. He just didn't do it all the time.
Yeah, it's just about finding more consistency in that department for sure. Obviously, you've been watching more games of Jacob on video after the season was shut down on the Instat account. And then another thing that, could have been played to his benefit was I was thinking that he was probably a lock to make the U18 team in Plymouth, but, obviously that tournament's not happening anymore either. That's obviously a situation where he would have been going against some of the other best in his age division, probably would have been seeing a bit more of those flashes consistently, potentially. Do you think the fact that the season ended early and the fact that there's no U18 team might have hurt his draft stock at all?
My personal opinion, I don't know if he would have slid, or if he has slid because we didn't have it. But I think maybe the U18 team would have been given him a chance to kind of pop, for lack of a better word. So if he went in there into Plymouth and just had a fantastic tournament for Canada, that could have been something to kind of just pop him up the rankings a little bit. There's a lot of focus on that tournament. We've seen players before that have just had a great tournament, and it's really given them a bump. So I think from that standpoint, it definitely could have helped his cause. But I don't think it's something where because he didn't take part in it, that all of a sudden he's a slider. I think there's a limit to how far this kid is going to fall because of the talent level. I had him in my top 10 for a bit, but just backed off a bit because there's just too many players ahead of him with much less risk involved in selecting them. But he might end up being a steal of this draft for some lucky team. If he competed like Tristan Robbins, who we talked about earlier, the potential would be through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, when you see him and he, has those flashes, you're like, oh, wow, that's impressive. But yeah, like you said, consistency obviously is a big factor.
Yeah, Jérôme or Brad, either of you guys have anything you wanted to add just on him?
No, I mean, to me, like the skill level for Perrault is like very high. From what I saw in the first half, I was really worried about that compete level. But it looks like he fixed that in the second half of the year. And also I think even I thought like maybe skating was like, I guess the compete level really hurt my viewing of his skating. I didn't think he looked as fast as he did in the second half, but just by moving his feet more and not, standing still on the ice, really, I think really helped him at least showcase his speed a bit more in the second half than he did in the first half.
Yeah, to add to that, I guess the main thing I will say about Perrault is, as Mark mentioned, this is one of the deepest drafts we've ever seen for shooting talent. He's the single most versatile shooter out of any of them. And that's really saying something. He's just remarkable how many ways he can beat a goalie, and from where on the ice he can beat a goalie anywhere. It's unbelievable watching him.
Yep, definitely one of those lethal shot types. We'll just go back. Another Q prospect that we like a lot here, or I like a lot personally, at least I know Mark's a big fan too, is Dawson Mercer. He's ranked 18th on our list, the second ranked QMJHL prospect on our list. So Jérôme, just like Lafreniere, you've seen this kid play for a while. What do you remember of him, from his QMJHL draft year?
So in this case, so it's a kind of like a new trend for high-end kids from a smaller province. They'll leave their province. So for like province out east, so PI, Newfoundland. If there's anyone really good, they'll usually end up playing not in their own province. So Mercer left when he was 15, and he moved to Sherbrooke, Quebec. He went to an English prep school, Bishop School College. So he played his draft year there. So it's the same. Noah Dobson also went there in his last year of Bantam. So in this case, I think everyone knew he had like the talent, but it was really hard to like compare him to guys that play major in Quebec. So he was always like, everyone knew about him, but it was just hard to really not project him, but like as far as like ranking goes, it was a bit tougher. And then the last tournament of the year, which is the Gatorade Challenge. So it's usually about 1 month before the Q draft. So he played there for Team Newfoundland. So on his team, he had like Alex Newhook and Brett Bodgel, which were like the top two other players from Newfoundland. Both play minor immediately in Ontario. And Mercer was the star of that team in that tournament. He led the tournament in scoring. And he really, like, that tournament really, I think, helped him with his draft stock because just the fact that he played prep school hockey, he didn't play against any of the top players all year. So then the time he played against them, he was a dominant player. So that definitely helped his draft stock. He went 8 overall to Drummondville, And I guess the rest is history. He had like 3 great years in junior, and now he's getting ready to get drafted in the NHL.
Yeah, and not only is he from, a smaller province in Newfoundland, but he's from a small town within the province of Newfoundland too. So obviously, he's had to spread his wings kind of earlier on. I had a chance to talk to him earlier in the year. I did an interview with him, and he just is very mature. And I don't know if moving away at such a young age maybe helps that, but I was just very impressed with how well spoken he was, and how good of a kid he was to talk to. But how have you seen Mercer progress in his 3 years in the QMJHL so far?
Yeah, so like I don't live too far from Drummondville, so I got to see him play a lot in the last 3 years. So his first year in the league, he didn't. So it's a pretty big jump from coming from prep school to major junior. So Drummondville took it slowly with him. He ended up playing like mostly third, fourth line, but their coach is Dominic Ducharme. Now he's with the Montreal Canadiens. He started giving him like some shift on the PK here and there, some shift on the PP here and there, just giving like some experience playing in different roles. And so his first year was like mostly like a learning process for him. And then his second year, Drummondville had like a really good team, probably number 2 team in the league. And Mercer scored 30 plus goals, but he was not like the main focus of that team. They had a lot of offensive weapons, and he was just one of them. He was just not like the key player to watch on that team. But so he scored 30 plus goals, but I was really impressed with his work on the PK. That was like he was slowly becoming a really good two-way player in the queue. So what for me was really impressive this past year was so Drummondville lost a ton of players to the pro, and then so Mercer played mostly on the wing last year, that second year. So the third year they put it at center, and he's playing with two line mates who, all due respect, they're more like third line type player in the queue. So he's playing with them, and he's producing at like a really high rate at the beginning of the year, and so he's like creating offense on his own, which was there last year, but he was so like well surrounded. So it's kind of like, okay, maybe playing on a great team really helps him. But I was really impressed how he like was able to produce at the beginning of the year with average line mates. And Drummondville was not supposed to be really good this year, and then I think the work of Mercer and really helped them win games. And so I was really impressed how he was able to produce with like not much help around him. And his odds started the season continue with the Canada-Russia challenge, and at some point we just didn't have any choice to just moving him up pretty high in our rankings mid-season.
Yeah, I'll just throw in a quick two cents here. I really agree with Jérôme on just how well-rounded he is. He has a bit of the it factor, the compete, the hockey sense that we look for. And Rachel, you mentioned how impressed you were with the interview, and so was I. And we weren't alone, because I know just tons of scouts mentioned me. He was way up the rankings as far as their if they were to do their interview rankings, he was way up there with impressive, which I don't think shocks many of us. Yeah, no,
he was a great kid to talk to. So definitely be interesting to see, where his future takes him and where he goes from here. But as we were talking about, there's a lot of high caliber shooters in this draft. We're going to discuss 2 of them now, being Jack Quinn and Alexander Holt. We've had quite a few people ask us about, the Quinn versus Holt. In our ranking, we actually gave the edge to Quinn. He's at 6 and Holt is at 10. So I'll just let you guys explain a little bit about, what gave Jack Quinn the edge in our ranking over Alexander Holt.
Yeah, so Brad, I want you to get involved here, because you did a lot of work on the Quinn versus Holtz and breaking down their shots. But I'll just mention quickly that whole grouping in that area was incredibly tight. Quinn at 6, Jarvis at 7, Raymond at 8, Rossi 9, Holtz 10. We watched an absolute ton of those players after the shutdown, and the order changed slightly amongst that group. Askarov, the goaltender, is also in that group, but he's displayed as number one on the goalie list in our book. We'll probably get into some of those players as we do more podcasts this summer. But Brad, why don't you go ahead and you can just talk a little bit about, you know, what I wanted you to do when digging in on their shots specifically, and to dig into their game as we started to try and separate that group.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting aspects of it was just how unconventional Alexander Holtz is as a shooter relative to some NHLers that look to shoot off the rush, for instance. So if you were to break down some NHL players who are very good at shooting off the rush, such as Kasperi Kapanen or Jakub Vrana, they look to use their speed to shift their angle of their shot and go against the grain and use their ability to shift their shooting angle as they're going against the grain so that they can open up the far side of the net. Holtz doesn't do that nearly as as they do. What Holtz mostly relies upon is basically his fast twitch, explosive shooting mechanics. And what we mean by that is, if you look at his hips, his core, and his shoulders, when he rotates through his shot extension, it is just like the snap of your fingers. It is automatic and extremely fast. And that's very useful because it's very hard for a goalie to pick up on any sort of tell if there is no tell before the actual release point itself. And that's what really separates Holtz and what allows Holtz to do what he does from a stationary positions or when he's going at half speeds. Okay, so for instance, like some of his best shots this year were him gliding down, not skating aggressively, not in full stride, but gliding down on a low shooting percentage angle and sniping top shelf seemingly out of nowhere, with his feet basically planted as he was gliding. And again, you could see the reaction of the goaltender, the goalies he was shooting on, and that was that they were delayed. They were late to pick up on the shooting angle, and that's because, again, there was no tells, and there's just no way of them being able to react in the time frame allowed that Holtz gives them. And another reason isn't just his body mechanics within the shot; it's also the sheer velocity of the shot. He knows how to bend and get that whip-like release on a shot, and it creates such an incredible velocity and incredible shot quality that it just leaves the goalie very little room to work with when they have to laterally adjust to his shot. So, for instance, if you break down the NHL right now, the main ways you score on a goalie are from lateral passes that go from a low percentage to a high percentage shooting area, and deflections or broken play types that have redirections. Okay, that's how you beat goalies in the NHL. Alexander Holtz is phenomenal at being the guy who can get to the soft ice and then get the puck off his stick fast enough where the goalie can't move laterally in a position to stop him in time. That's how we think Alexander Holtz can translate his game to the NHL. Now, to contrast that, Jack Quinn works basically the opposite, because the way that Holtz works is primarily on the perimeter. And now when it comes to decision making, for most prospects, if they're shooting from the perimeter, we would grade their shots as lower decision shots. Like, that's not a great decision to shoot from the outside. But because of Holtz's shot quality, it allows him to get away with that. We give him leeway and say, well, if you have an elite shot, it's okay to shoot at a lower percentage angle. Okay. Well, with Quinn, that's not the case. We don't worry about any of this because there is no perimeter shooting with Jack Quinn. With Jack Quinn, the greatest gift he has is his ability to understand how to get into a high percentage, high danger area when he is working from a low danger area. What this means in real time is we see him cut through traffic. We see him anticipate where he needs to be in a passing lane to receive a pass in tight to the net and then score his goals. And then when we're talking about the versatility, we give the edge to Quinn. And one of the reasons for that is because he's better at shooting off balance. With Holtz needs a bit. With Holtz, it's more. He needs to have structure within how he shoots. There's very few times that we saw him get like bumped in traffic and then be able to get his release off and score. Okay, it was very rare actually. In Quinn's case, you can knock him halfway to the ice. He'll still find a way to get a shot off. And he needs that because he's not the biggest kid. Okay, 6 feet. He's not like a 6'3" modern day, prototypical power forward. Like, he's not Chris Kreider. He's not built like Chris Kreider. So he needs to be able to take a hit, be able to absorb contact, be okay with knifing through traffic and still getting his release off. And we found that he did that at just a remarkably exceptional rate. Now, the big thing with Jack Quinn that people will say is, well, he was going up against defensemen that were second rate in the OHL. He wasn't going up against top pairing defensemen very often. And that's true. He was on the second line. But if you look at how he did it using his hockey sense, we still believe that it was translatable regardless of the fact that he was given lesser competition on the back end with most of the OHL teams he was facing.
Yeah, for sure. And just some of the things that you mentioned just back there, just to get a bit of clarification. When you say release point, can you maybe just do a quick explanation of shooting for everyone listening?
Yeah, sure. So there's different elements to a release point. The release point, when we say release point, we're talking about when you see a back leg extending outward, when you're seeing the player rotate entirely through a shot. Like, think Philip Forsberg. Philip Forsberg has a very long extension when he shoots the puck. So when he's frozen, if you freeze Philip Forsberg at the end of his release point, he has his back leg kicked back, he has his core fully rotated, and his stick is completely extended through the shot motion. That's the release point. The release point is when he initially shoots the puck off his stick and then has that follow through animation, that or follow through motion. So that's what we mean by release point. And a lot of players have different types of release points, and shoot in different fashions. So for instance, Austin Matthews uses his footwork to mask his release point, so it's very difficult to pick up on his shot. Alexander Holtz does not use his footwork before shooting the puck. Jack Quinn also doesn't use footwork like Austin Matthews nearly as often either. Everybody shoots a little differently, and everybody kind of has their own style. So it is interesting to see just how many different types of shooters there are in this draft and what they bring to the table. And we just felt like Quinn and Holtz and Perreault were really just incredible shooters. For our money, the top 3 or 4 shooters in this class.
Yeah, and just quickly, Rachel, I guess the original thing is, when it comes to the ranking here and these two versus each other, and then I mentioned the whole group, one of the things that we really tried to look at when we were trying to narrow down this group and rank this little grouping here was line driving ability. So we thought back, and one player we thought back about in a previous ranking was Mikko Rantanen. We had him 10th overall in his draft year, and yeah, he went 10th, but we didn't have him high enough. And we didn't give him enough credit for his line driving ability. If we did, we would have had him moved up higher than 10. And in Holtz's case, it's actually why one of the reasons why he's at the bottom of that grouping, because we like the guys above him a little bit more in that line driving ability. So just another little bit of information there regarding that group and how difficult it was to ranking that group.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, it gets tight at that point, right? Because everybody, they're all good players. But anyways, I just wanted to thank you guys for jumping on and doing this today. And, a huge thank you to everybody who's already purchased and downloaded, our book. As we mentioned a few times, it's the 2020 NHL Draft Black Book. It's available now on hockeyprospect.com and also on Amazon. But yeah, thanks guys for joining in today.
No problem.
Yeah, it was good.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and so obviously, there's a lot of storylines in this draft. We've talked about a few today, the caliber of the German players and, how many, great shooters there are in this draft. But these are just some of the storylines that we're going to cover, over the course of the summer, as we're hoping to do these kind of podcasts, every couple of weeks or so. These guys are hard at work working on the Scouts training course, which we hope to release this fall. I've had the opportunity to log on and kind of test it out. I think it's super informative and useful, and honestly, just a good way to learn how to scout. So definitely keep an eye out, for any announcements on that on our Twitter, which is @ScoutingService. But thank you to everyone who listened, and we'll be back with another episode soon.